we kind of walked through your entire career, but I do wonder, are there any operational stories or tidbits that you didn't share last time? Can you even remember?
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, obviously, if you take a career and how long we spent in the military, you gloss over nearly everything, right? The impactful stories of Vinny saving my life, almost getting killed in Iraq several times. We didn't cover even
10%.
Yeah, like there's so much to cover. There's a lot there.
I guess, do you remember, to contrast, anything that you would like to or is worth sharing that you remember not sharing on the last one?
Yeah, I don't know if I shared this as a war story, but it did make it into my book, Prepared. And the reason it did is not because it's a cool guy story, but because it was really a lesson learned about survival and instincts. There's two significant ones that come to mind. I'll just gloss over the first one. The first one, as reflected in the book, is I thought going to Afghanistan and going to war was going to be like training. You know, you train for patrolling with a carbine and the FM 7-8 gunfight, small unit tactics gunfight. Except there was no battle drill to implement when you're on the receiving end of a 107 millimeter rocket, right? And so I've never been so scared in my life than being on the receiving end of that, because I had no control, right? I actually froze, and I reflected this in the first chapter of my book, because I wanted people to know that even when you're trained and you've been through it all, seemingly, there might be a time and place in your life where you come head on with a crisis and you freeze. Now, in my specific case, we were receiving 107 millimeter rockets in an open HLZ in the middle of nowhere in Afghanistan in a patrol base. And I was prepared for the deliberate attack as well. So I was worried about close proximity as they were impacting. And I ran behind a truck, took a knee, and came to the realization in a couple seconds that hiding behind a GMV that wasn't up armored, so a light skinned Humvee, was not going to save me. So then the fear went away, because I'm like, if it's my time, it's my time. Now, the receiving end of a 107 millimeter rocket, as it impacts in its trajectory, could be 25 plus meters. It could be 100 meters, depending on how it impacts the earth and how open the terrain is. So I wasn't prepared, is the point of that story. I wasn't prepared, and I worked through it. At one point, I grabbed a concertina wire that was coiled, that was to keep animals and goats out from our HLZ. And our guys were on the river side of it, on the other side of it towards the river, and I grabbed it with my bare hand. I still have the scar on my hand from grabbing it, because I wasn't thinking. It's not because I was a hero, it's because I wasn't thinking. I grabbed it and then ripped it back so the guys can run up and I can create a breach point for them as we were getting on to the UTVs, side-by-sides, or whatever we had to get off the HLZ. I remember screaming at the top of my lungs for some of the guys to return fire, and I don't know why I was screaming. Like, there was no reason for me to scream. I could have just communicated to it. But I was hyped up. I was hyper-vigilant, obviously, because of the situation. And it's a true testament that, again, you could be a trained operator, go through all of the stress inoculation. It doesn't mean it's going to prepare you for everything. And so I had to adapt. The second story is how I almost nearly died on a rooftop in Sadr City in a hellacious gunfight and was saved by an F-16. Did I tell this story? I don't think so. I don't think so. We were in a major gunfight, a major offensive with the Iraqi counterterrorism force, and me and a guy named Chris, great guy. He's the best number one man I ever worked with, Chris was, because he just had no fear mechanism. He just would go head on into any situation.
Is that necessarily the best guy?
No, well, it's the best guy for him, for him to be number
That's
one.
the number one guy you want.
I would just be his good number two guy, but I was not going to be the good number one guy. And the thinking in my eyes as a guy in a stack was I never wanted to be the first guy, because the first guy commonly ran into a problem, and the problem was typically a middle-aged male that you had to flex cuff. And so if I was the number two guy, I could bypass him while he's flex cuffing a guy and get more deeply into the building where there was a possibility of killing a bad guy. And I always thought that way. And so Chris would always advance on the breach point he was 6'3", had a long gait. I had to run 2 steps for each one of his just to keep up with him. And he was just a great operator, just a really good guy. Very intelligent, hyper intelligent. And on this mission, we were snipers, except it wasn't really a sniper op. We were on Overwatch with tanks and Bradleys at a blocking position that was basically blocking out and creating a corridor for this hostage rescue that was taking place in Sadr City with the assault force. And it was a big op. I mean, we had 3 or 4 tanks, 3 or 4 Bradleys, and it was like tank Bradley. Well, we got linked up with Big Army, and we were the only special operations guys attached to this Big Army unit. It was 4th Infantry Division. And so we get set up in place, and just in typical Chris fashion, I mean, he was my cell leader at the time. He's like, man, we need to get to a better vantage point. And so we decided to assault a 3-story building surreptitiously, occupy the building, and then take the rooftop. And we did that. We did it at night, quietly. We locked everybody down in the house or the building into a room. And then we occupied the rooftop with a 4th Infantry Division sniper team. And we as snipers didn't have our sniper rifles because we thought we were going to be in the back of a tank or Bradley deconflicting the friendly coordination between our unit and the blocking position. So long story short, we're on top of the rooftop and things kick off. The breach point initiates, and this turns into a pretty significant gunfight. I remember at one point we're on all 4 corners of this rooftop with a low wall. I mean, the wall had to have been 3 feet tall. It was just tall enough where if you were in the proned out, you would have cover. But if you were on a knee, you would be exposed. So a lot of us were proned out because we started receiving incoming RPG fire that was air bursting over our heads, reaching the max ord of the round. We started getting shot at with PKM machine gun. At one point, I looked over to Chris. I'll never forget this. Like we were both, our heads are in the ground. I mean, as low as you can get on concrete. I almost was like smelting into the concrete. I looked over at Chris, and he's kind of smiling at me with his head laying down, and there's a satellite dish behind him that's being disintegrated. And what that told me is, at one point, the enemy had gotten to elevation and had grazing fire over our rooftop because everything else had been ineffective, and now they were picking apart obstacles on top of the roof. So we were kind of pinned down. I mean, we could have went down into the cupola in the doghouse and went down the stairs, but we didn't because we had to have Overwatch. We were the only Overwatch that could see what was going on with the assault force and not down a single alley or roadway. The tanks and Brads had all roadways covered. And obviously that was a heavy munition. They were shooting and killing everything. At one point, there was a saw gunner. I mean, like in the movies. I mean, this kid was like a PV2. And he yells back to me. He's like, "Sergeant, there's a guy running across the field." And I was like, "Okay. Like, is he armed?" He's like, "I think so." I was like, "Shoot him." And he's like, "Roger that." And he just unloads a saw. And I kind of went over to that area and realized there was dudes in black pajamas IMTing across this open field. And all of them are QRFing their boys in Sadr City because they know that the assault force is kicking off this thing. What they don't know is that on the road, one of the main supply routes, the MSRs, there's tanks and brads lined out with remote weapon systems, on manual guns, with FLIR pods, with systems. This thing kicks off at late in the morning, early morning hours, late at night, 3, 4 in the morning. It's supposed to be, time on target minutes. They get pinned down on the objective. It turns into the sun coming up. At one point, where I got scared was when mortar rounds started bracketing the building that we were sitting on top of. We had a communicator, an RTO that was with us. He was our RTO that we brought, who had main comms with the assault force, and he also had comms with the aircraft. And he heard over the radio the controller deconflict that near the blocking position, he saw guys on top of a rooftop firing. And the pucker factor immediately got tight. And we thought for sure we were about to be friendly casualties because the fast movers had identified us and they were trying to vector in to get situation awareness of who we are. Talked to the combat control later. There was no fear of us getting eviscerated, but for sure it was brought across traffic. We could not communicate with anybody. We were in the dark. So this is kicking off. The young sniper from 4th ID who had a Remington 700 long action, essentially a sniper weapon system, SWS, had already killed 3 guys. I had already dumped a group of guys who went into a bus with my M4. I didn't have a sniper rifle. I almost took the kid's saw, a PV2 saw. If he hadn't effectively engaged the enemy, I would have took a saw because I felt helpless. I had a 10.5-inch upper on my M4. And the guys that I winded up hitting inside of the short bus, I had to elevate my rifle to be able to plunge it into the position. And obviously I didn't use my EOTech or my optic, it was daylight, but I had to walk the rounds in by watching them splash on the ground and then eventually into the vehicle and the back glass of the vehicle. It was a nightmare because we knew we were compromised, obviously, because the enemy was effective with their fire. It was only a matter of time before we got a round or a casualty on top of the rooftop, and the tanks and brads were eviscerating everything they saw. We made the decision to get off the rooftop, but we needed the right timing, and so the F-16, seeing and hearing what was going on as we were communicating in the blind, transmitting but not receiving, decided to do a low pass. And when they did that low pass, I thought they were going to do a gun run on us. And we didn't know what they were doing. But the 4th ID kids identified the F-16 coming down, F-16, F-18, I can't remember the time period. But he was fast moving and he was coming down towards our position. At the last second, he came up, was probably 500 feet AGL, and flew down that road right in front of our building, popped flares, and then went straight up into the sky. Lulled the gunfight just enough for us to get off the rooftop. And then we got into the vehicles. And at the time we loaded into one of the brads, the tanks were engaging targets 25 meters in front of them. They were hitting buildings and destroying entire compounds with rounds. What is it, 105, whatever the round is, 120, 105, eviscerating the entire structures as we were exfilling on target. All be told, we killed a lot of bad guys and we shut down Sadr City because it became like national news in the country. Like it was a big deal. And it was the first time in my military career, before Vinny wound up saving my life, it was the first time in my military career where I felt vulnerable, whereby we always had the tactical advantage, and it almost felt like cheating. When the sun came up and I realized we were exposed and the enemy knew where we were, and it was all Mahdi militia guys, and they were more capable, more equipped, I felt like there was a possibility that I could die. on that rooftop. Luckily, I didn't. Everybody came out unscathed.
Yeah, that's intense. So you guys didn't lose anybody?
No, that trip we did lose one of our assaulters, but not on that op.
Yeah. Wow. Did that change, I guess, your mentality and preparation and attitude with subsequent operations?
Yeah, there was an evolution of like learning each rotation and each mission. Man, if I can go back, I would be doing things completely different. I made so many mistakes as a young SF guy because I thought I knew the solution. And yeah, you're figuring it out at the speed of war. But yeah, every single rotation, every single op that we had, something significant happened. We lost a guy, we got guys injured. We were really good at adapting and changing things. And for sure, after that, I just looked at things differently. I even felt vulnerable to the point where I was like, do I want to die for this? Like, I was asking myself those questions that early on because it was my first exposure to vulnerability.
That's intense. Mistake-wise, is there a mistake or mistakes that stand out as being the most impactful from the way you change doing business operationally?
Dude, yeah. In 2005 in Afghanistan, I was a young 18 Bravo, a weapons guy. And yeah, you're a weapons specialist, but also you do tactics, tactical training, and you're typically in charge of the base defense plan with the 18 Charlies, the engineers. My senior 18 Bravo had surgery, so he wasn't there. Ernest Edgerly, really good guy, angry man, but a really good guy. So when we got to our fire base, I had to come up with a base defense plan. I was already Ranger qualified. I had infantry experience, and I thought I was squared away. And so I made a base defense plan that included occupying rooftops with big guns to prevent a deliberate attack on our base. Because the worst case scenario was a comprehensive, complex attack using indirect in coordination with a direct attack. So, they would launch or lob, we get our heads down, then they would penetrate the wire, and then we'd be fighting for our lives in fire bases. And it had happened the year prior, and even during that rotation cycle in 2005 in several bases. I mean, medals of honor were posthumously awarded for things that happened like that. And what I would do in our base defense plan is have all of our guys occupy rooftops, all of them. And in one case, we were receiving incoming fire. It might have been 1 or 2 in the morning. And we got up on the rooftop, me and my 18 Charlie, who I bunked with, named Lee. And Lee was a great operator, great Green Beret, very engineer savvy, very intelligent, good country singer. Good dude to be around. Great guy. He was on the rooftop with me, and we had a 240 Bravo with a really crappy night optic. I think it was called a PAS 13. It only used like black or white for heat, and you could do either or. We were searching for the enemy, and as we were searching for the enemy who was out of range, which it didn't even make sense to be on the rooftop in an indirect attack, we received, we believe, a mortar round or a rocket. It nearly killed us because it almost hit us directly, and it impacted the fuel cell off of our inner compound. And I realized in that moment, but reflecting on it the next day, that I had nearly created a base defense plan that would have gotten our guys killed. Now, the solution is don't have all the guys occupy the rooftops, because in an indirect attack, you're exposing them to the enemy. Do some selective guns, 50 cals, Mark 47s or Mark 19s, but then have the majority of your guys bedded down or locked down. My mentality was young, egotistical. You got to be in the fight. You got to kick doors in and shoot bad guys in the face. But I wasn't thinking smart. I was thinking with ego. And so after that, making that mistake that nearly got me and Lee killed, I changed the entire base defense plan. And every base I was in after that began to talk about and navigate how to fix that, because it was a pretty impactful lesson learned.
Yeah. I mean, mistakes made equals lessons learned. To me, oftentimes it's hard to argue that it wasn't actually beneficial in the long run. A lot of mistakes made, with the exception being when people's lives are lost because of them. I am curious, of all of the different things, deployments you've done, operations you've been a part of or conducted, is there anything that you regret doing in your time at war?
No, I really don't have any regrets. I mean, there's difficult situations I've been put in, and I don't regret doing them, because the honest answer is, at the time, in the moment, I knew I was operating off of good intentions. I've talked about it openly, like engaging young men on the battlefield. I don't want to kill young men on the battlefield, but I also know not potentially engaging a guy who picks up an AK and runs at a checkpoint, ignores warning shots, could have led to my own guys getting killed. And I've seen it, I've experienced it on target with my peers, where those hard decisions had to be made. And the chain of command was very supportive of our decision making on the objective, on the X especially. So no, I don't have any regrets with any specific actions. In 2006, we did lose an operator named Tung Nguyen, who was a rock star in a friendly fire situation with not our unit, but an adjacent unit. And I often think some of the things that we did, for example, throwing 9-bangers into courtyards, I think about the young private, because we did identify that it was a young soldier who wound up opening fire into that compound, that he was put in a difficult situation, that maybe I would have done the same thing if I'm monitoring a remote weapon system in a striker on a monitor and I see flashes of light that seems like a machine gun, that I might have done that same thing. So for sure, there are things that have happened around me and things that I've done myself, but I don't have any regrets in that sense.
Yeah. When you or we look at the broad scope, the 30,000-foot view of Iraq and Afghanistan as a cultural or societal foreign policy decision that we made collectively as a country, compounded by the withdrawal in Afghanistan, the rise of ISIS, once we left Iraq, kind of the state of both of those operational theaters present day. Do you have a regret kind of collectively as a nation that we did what we did in either of those places, and or how we did them?
Yeah, for sure. I think back to the basics of fathering, right? Like, you might tell your son, always leave the situation that you're in better than it was when you showed up, right? Always upgrade the circumstance or improve the situation. And I think collectively, if I ask myself that question as a nation, both in Iraq and Afghanistan, if we made it better or we improved the situation, and the answer is unequivocally no. We made it worse. We amplified something we really didn't understand. And there were commanders like Stanley McChrystal, McRaven, who did get a sense of that. But it certainly didn't affect their policy changes and the actions that they did during war. In reflection, they wrote about it, that they really didn't understand how we were amplifying in the moment insurgencies by creating more terrorists when we went into a target house and killed all the middle-aged males, and you couldn't attrit a war away, right? That's one segment of kill capture that has to be part of a larger strategy. Collectively, for sure. Individually, no. because the targets I've been on, the men that I operated with, the S2 intelligence experts that we utilized and leveraged their intel, were going after the worst of the worst. I mean, some of them that ended up starting ISIS. But yeah, for sure, deep regrets collectively, because again, it's like, what did we do? And I hate even speculating about that, because it makes me feel dirty thinking that we sacrificed so much, including friends and brothers that we left behind. Ben Bittner, who my son is named after, died leading his team in Afghanistan. And I ask myself often, was it worth his life? And I think the answer is no. I don't think it was worth his life. I think he should be raising his son and laughing with his wife. And nothing in that desert on the ground was worth his life. And I just feel weird saying that, but I think it's the truth.
Yeah. It's a tough realization to come to. I agree completely. I've posed that question to quite a few guests with experiences in both or either places. Obviously hindsight's 20/20, but if you go back to September 12th, 2001, or let's say early in the year 2003, and you put yourself in President Bush's shoes at that time, what would you have done different?
Well, I think the strategy initially, especially with Afghanistan, was noble and the right thing. And we saw how much impact Delta, 5th Group, 3rd Group, some of the initial elements that went in, these horse soldiers that went into Tora Bora and Operation Anaconda and chased these bad guys into the hinterlands of Afghanistan. That was an effective strategy. Contain them and then drop bombs. Then there should have been a deliberate campaign to pull out, to transition. And we didn't do that. I mean, look at the targeting of Osama bin Laden. Our focus became so thinly spread across that region that we couldn't prioritize and focus our attention on the biggest target that was the head of the snake, allegedly. And so I think a big problem was we stretched our resources too thin, and then it became a self-licking ice cream cone feeding this system in this military-industrial complex that we've all been warned about.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. Do you think that it's fair to say, or an accurate prediction, hypothetically, to say that had we done the initial however many month kind of send the rabbits down their hole and then bomb the shit out of them and then pull back, that we would have actually not only just gotten bin Laden but actually killed or captured him sooner than we did, had we not spent a decade plus after that doing what we did there?
100%. Look, I think small elements, surgical strikes, high-valued, correlated, high-fidelity target sets is the way to go. I mean, Iraq is a great example of that right now. That strategy, that campaign has led to us being still there, supporting host nation forces, going out, doing surgical strikes, targeting ISIS right now. I mean, killing terrorists in Iraq by, with, and through, without saturating the environment with occupation. It's always an effective strategy in counterterrorism to do that. We've done it in global pursuit across the entire world. Why we decided to just hold and then just lulled for decades, it's something that I just think is a complete failure of leadership and trust.